Ingram about 10 games.
I did not get into the suspension aspect, Max, because that's question number 2.
Well, here we go.
Yeah, okay, let me break down how they were decided, guys. So NBA Vice President of Basketball Operations, Kiki Vandeweghe, explained that Ingram has been suspended for aggressively returning to and escalating the altercation and throwing a punch in the direction of Paul, confronting a game official in a hostile manner, and instigating the overall incident by shoving James Harden. Now,
this is unbelievable. If this was David Stern, David Stern would have gave Brandon Ingram at least 15 games. At least 15 games. Rajon Rondo for spitting would have probably got 12 to 15 games, and Brandon Ingram would have probably got 15 to 20 games, somewhere around there. And CP3 would have probably got about 5 games.
Now, Rondo has been suspended for instigating physical altercation with spitting and throwing multiple punches at Paul. Paul suspended for poking at and making contact with the face of Rondo and throwing multiple punches at him. So, Max, you kind of started with it. Are the suspensions fair?
Okay, technically you have to suspend Chris Paul, and the idea is you don't want to incentivize throwing punches. So no matter what happens, if you don't throw a punch, you're not suspended. I get why you want to reinforce those rules. But in this case, there are extenuating circumstances. Stephen A. brought it up. He got spat on. That is a violation. And Chris Paul showed great restraint, because putting your hands up in his face and in retaliation.
That was extraordinary restraint. Because to be honest with you, he probably should have hooked off on him right after he got spat on.
He didn't even punch him. He just warned him, like, do not do that. That's all. Then you get punched twice. You're not supposed to punch back. It's unrealistic. And then, by the way, he got punched in the end by the kid who started the whole thing, by the guy who started the whole thing. Brandon Ingram was a very young player. That's why I'm calling him kid.
I tell you what, though, CP3 got a couple good licks up in there. He got a few good licks in there.
Kid versus Chris Paul, a veteran, guys like that. I would use discretion and not suspend Chris Paul. I think Ingram and Rondo have to be suspended. Rondo not only threw 2 punches, and he threw the first punch, even though he spat and then threw 2 punches. He has to be suspended. Ingram pushed Harden, and then when it was all over, punched Chris Paul. He must be suspended. Those two both need more than a couple of games, and I would not have suspended Chris Paul.
I would have suspended Chris Paul because I'm a Knicks fan, and I watched the Knicks I watched multiple players back in the...
Yeah, well, you know what, Stephen A. Smith, you lose a lot of credibility when you start to state that you're going to suspend Chris Paul because you're a Knicks fan. Like, nobody gives a shit about you being a Knicks fan. And I state this all the time about the Knicks and their fans. They're the biggest, whiniest bunch of, excuse my language, bitches on the planet Earth. And I'm not against the Knicks at all, but Knicks fans, they just whine so damn much.
In the day, get suspended for simply stepping a foot.
And I say that with all due respect to you brothers out there that are Knicks fans. I got nothing but love for you. But there's a certain segment of Knicks fans that act like such big bitches.
Over the line. So there's a rule, a letter of the law. We understand that. So Chris Paul, I don't have any problem with the 2-game suspension. Here's where it differs for me. Brandon Ingram would have gotten a minimum of 10 games. A minimum of...
I agree with that, bro.
Of 10 games, because he was the instigator, plus he came back into the fray and tried to sucker punch Chris Paul. I did not see whether he connected or not to Chris Paul, but I know he threw a punch at Chris Paul.
Yeah, he hit somebody, because you see when he threw the punch, his shoulder blade jerked back, so he connected with somebody.
He would be gone for 10 games. And I hate to say this because I'm a fan of Rondo's, actually. I like him a lot. I like his competitiveness or whatever. And if he had thrown a punch, then I would have had no problems with 3 to 5 games, and that would have been it. The fact that we're talking about spitting in somebody's face.
Oh, no, he connected. He hit CP3. Brandon Ingram connected.
To me, that would have been a minimum of...
CP3 was probably like, I got spat on, Rondo hit me, and then a cheerleader came up and smacked me. Oh, that was Ingram? That was a punch? Oh.
Of 15 games for Rajon Rondo. I would have suspended him for 15 games. And I think former Commissioner David Stern would have suspended him for 15 games.
That's interesting. So Stephen A. would have given Rajon Rondo more games. You know, I understand that reasoning because he's the one who did spit, so... I understand where you're coming from. I just would have given Ingram more games because he started the whole thing and then he attempted to escalate it at the end.
Let's keep in mind that when Carmelo Anthony got into a fight at Madison Square Garden over a decade ago. He got 15 games. All right, and I don't recall spitting in somebody's face being a part of the equation that determined the level of punishment that he received. This is obviously a different age that we're talking about here, because Commissioner Adam Silver is the man, not Commissioner David Stern, and one would argue that he's been far more player-friendly than David Stern may have been. Fair enough, but I will tell you that Brandon Ingram definitely would have gotten 10 games, double digits, because of the instigation, and in the case of Rondo, only because spitting in the face were involved. If it wasn't for the spit, again, I'm at the 3 to 5 game mark, right where he is, right around that category. But because he spit in Chris Paul's face, I would have suspended Rajon Rondo 15 games.
When you saw,
I feel where you're coming from there.
You saw Chris Paul. First thing I thought when I saw Chris Paul put his hands in Rondo's face, I literally had the thought he either said something about his kids or something. It had to be something completely out of bounds or spat on him. I literally had that thought because I couldn't see what else would elicit that reaction. And it turns out he actually spat on him, and they have video evidence. I'm with you there. I don't know about 15.
To be quite honest with you, when it first happened and the broadcasters were stating that CP3 told them that he got spat on, I originally said to myself, I need to see that to believe it. Because Chris Paul's one of these guys who gets so worked up that he starts to imagine things that happened to him that did not really happen to him. He reminds me a lot of Roger Clemens. For those of you brothers who remember in the late 90s, Roger Clemens would get himself so worked up that he would imagine things that did not really occur. For those of you who don't know, Roger Clemens was a great pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, the Toronto Blue Jays, and in the late 90s, the New York Yankees. And during his time period with the Yankees started to have a relatively fevered rivalry with the New York Mets. And of course, they had what they called the Subway Series. And there was a moment where Mike Piazza hit a baseball that, of course, was pitched to him by Roger Clemens. The bat broke, and the broken bat came at Roger Clemens. And Roger Clemens tried to throw the broken bat at Mike Piazza as Mike Piazza ran to first base. Because in his mind, Mike Piazza was his enemy so much and Mike Piazza was his rival. This fool Roger Clemens actually seemed to think that Mike Piazza purposefully had the bat projectile at him. And Chris Paul reminds me of that. He's someone who admits that he deals with anxiety issues. So when he first stated that Rajon Rondo spit on him, I said to myself, I have to see this. Because CP3 is the type of guy who would think that somebody spat on him and really nothing happened. Or it was just an incidental projectile of spit. So once I saw the footage, I said, wow, yeah, there's no doubt that Rondo actually spit on him.
15 games, but more than just a couple. Let me say something about Ingram, though. I think when you saw LeBron James kind of hugging Chris Paul and talking to him, there are two different mentalities. There's the old school mentality, which ironically here the young kid has, which is it's us against them. It's like a gang mentality, a crew mentality when you're playing sports. You see this with the Red Sox and the Yankees, right? Yankees are indoctrinated to hate the Red Sox as they're coming up through the system. Where no matter what happens, if someone in your crew is fighting someone in their crew, you just start throwing punches. And Ingram brought that mentality. You call it a sucker punch, and I get it. You can't encourage it, and you must suspend him and punish him for it. But all Ingram knew, even though he started it, was these two dudes are fighting. That's my dude. I'm throwing punches.
Stop right there.
And I wonder, hold on one second. I wonder.
Yeah, stop him, Stephen A. Smith, because he's talking a lot of hot bullshit.
How the divide between the younger players and the older players. LeBron has friends around the league, best friends in the case of Chris Paul. I wonder what the division is there between the younger players who are like, hold up, our two teams are in a fight. What are you two doing hugging? And the older players who are saying, it's not that serious. We have friends who aren't on our team.
Well, here's the problem with that, Max Kellerman, before Stephen A. Smith speaks. The younger players are not at liberty to be concerned with what LeBron James does on any level because he trumps them beyond imagination. So no matter how they might feel about LeBron James pulling CP3 out of the fight, they have to keep it to themselves. It's the equivalent of a private in the military trying to question a major. All right, it's just not going to happen. Like, LeBron is not even a sergeant or lieutenant. He's like a major in their eyes and in the eyes of the organization. That's number one. Number two, the situation and the relationship dynamic that you should be concerned about dissolving is not between LeBron James and the younger players. It's between LeBron James and Rajon Rondo, because Rajon Rondo is another veteran on that team. Rajon Rondo is a player who does not look at LeBron James with any level of awe. He's not intimidated by LeBron James and his so-called majesty. And he will address LeBron on any and everything. And Rajon happened to be the one who was involved in the fight. If LeBron James had gotten involved in that fight and pulled Chris Paul off of another player on the Lakers, say Chris Paul had gotten into an altercation with Lance Stevenson, and LeBron James jumped in and pulled back Chris Paul. In Rajon Rondo's mind, he would have been thinking, what's going on with LeBron? What's going on with this guy? I guarantee you that's what he would have been thinking. Now, you ratchet it up even more when you consider that Rajon was actually one of the combatants. So I promise you that Rajon is thinking about this, and it would not shock me if LeBron and he had not spoken about it yet. And if they had spoken about it on the phone, I guarantee you, Rajon was probably like, I just need you to tell me exactly what you were thinking when you grabbed Chris Paul. Because we're friends here right now. We're teammates. We're brothers. You have to be considering us first before you consider Chris Paul. So I need you to tell me what you were thinking about. And LeBron probably like, right, I just wanted to get in the middle of it because, we're trying to build something right now. And, it was my first game at Staples Center. And Rajon was like, that's what you were thinking about. You were thinking about you. Not me, not the team. You think about you. Okay, I'll see you at practice. Click. But that's what you need to be thinking about, Max Kellerman. Think about LeBron and Rondo. Not LeBron and them young guys. Them young guys got to follow him no matter what.
Well, first of all, I'm kind of wondering what your definition of a fight is, because number one, after shoving James Harden, he didn't get in James Harden's face. He got in the face of an official who's about twice his age and about 10 inches shorter. That's number one. Number two, he tried to sucker punch Chris Paul as Chris Paul was being restrained by his teammate. I don't know about you, but I don't see anything. I'm not saying you use the word attractive or anything like that, but don't bring some street kind of mentality to me. That's not how it goes down. Number three, let me get back to the whole Chris Paul thing, because I spoke to Chris Paul afterwards, and Chris Paul's mentality was very, very simple. He did everything he possibly could to avoid getting suspended. He knows he's not just a player. He knows he's not just a star. He also knows that he's the president of the Players Association. So even after Rondo spit in his face, rather than yak him and punch him straight in the face from that off tap, what he did was mush them because he got spit in the face, and then Rondo caught him with a left straight to the jaw. And that's why Chris Paul retaliated the way that he did. Again, it warrants a suspension because in today's NBA, if you throw a punch by letter of the law, the second you throw a punch, it warrants an automatic suspension.
Stephen A,
but his suspension with Rondo shouldn't even be in the same ballpark.
That's what I've already touched on. That I said I wouldn't even suspended Chris Paul.
I know you did. I was just
Brandon Ingram is a live wire, and he not only started it, he finished it. And in between, the biggest problem I had is the way he approached the ref, like trying to intimidate him. And Rondo spitting is out of bounds. I agree about all that. What I'm bringing up is a separate point now, which is there seems to be a divide between the veterans here who showed cooler heads, who behaved like adults, like LeBron James, who have friends on other teams, like Chris Paul, and the younger players, like, for example, Brandon Ingram, who are like, time out. There's a problem between our team and their team. I'm not trying to hear about...
Where's your loyalty?
Where's your loyalty?
Well, that's a narrative that you're concocting in your own head, because Brandon Ingram is the only younger player that was involved in the fight. Everybody else was trying to break it up. So as usual, you're trying to start shit where none exists, Max Kellerman.
And
my point is, what divide are you talking about? Lonzo Ball was there. He's young. He didn't do that. You know, Kyle Kuzma was there. He was young. He didn't do that. There's plenty of players that were young that were on the court that didn't do what Brandon Ingram did.
Ding and ding.
It's not a testament to the younger generation. It's his idiotic self. It's him as an...
Absolutely. He has to be evaluated as an individual. Stop trying to turn this into a generational thing, Max Kellerman. He's trying to find certain straws that are not there, that are non-existent, and he's missing the one that is there, which is the issue between LeBron James and Rajon Rondo. I'm already on record as stating that I believe that they're going to be going at it with each other by somewhere around the All-Star break or the trading deadline. They're going to be at each other's throats, in my view, anyway. And to me, this is going to be the tipping point, or at least this is going to be the start of the dissolution of the relationship between LeBron James and Rajon.
Individual.
Stephen
Him
A.
as an individual.
No, Stephen A. I'll ask you this then. What did you think about LeBron pulling Chris aside? You know, his boy, rather
I had
than
no problem
his
with it.
teammates.
I had no problem with it either. That's more media bullshit, media narrative. Now, my issue with that is that, in my view, Rajon has a problem with it. I think that he's going to have a problem with it. But if you follow the history of the NBA, certain players have always tried to hold back players from other teams, whether they were friends or not. I mean, that's nothing new whatsoever. I've seen many fights between the Bulls and the Pistons, where Isaiah Thomas would run over to a Chicago Bull and try to hold them back. As I've already stated, there was a game that was played between the Knicks and the Bulls back in 95 or 96. It was in the Garden. It was the season where the Bulls won 72 games. And there was a little altercation between Ron Harper and Patrick Ewing, where Ron Harper had bumped Ewing and knocked him out of bounds. Ewing got up mad as hell, was about to bum rush Ron Harper, and Michael Jordan ran over and held him back and tried to usher him away because they were friends. It's not a huge deal.
First of all, Chris Paul was right in front of LeBron. So not only did LeBron is closest to proximity of Chris Paul, but he's also one of Chris Paul's best friends. They're the godfathers to each other's children.
Right.
They're that tight. So why wouldn't he grab Chris Paul? He did the right thing.
I think the thought process is, where's your allegiance? Because now this is his team.
Right, this is not simple.
It's stopping a fight.
It's not simple. I'm not claiming it's simple or that I agree that LeBron shouldn't have went to Chris Paul. I don't have a problem with what LeBron did either. But let's not pretend that there is not a mentality.
When you look at the replay, Chris Paul was the one who was directly in front of LeBron James. So this is just more media nonsense, media gibberish.
A camp that says, wait a minute, and we all know it, wait a minute. That's our team and their team. I'm not trying to hear about your relationship off the court. Now, I think LeBron behaved as an adult. I understand why he did it. I think it's Ingram who needs to learn something here. However, let's not pretend that on some level people don't relate, and there are some people who would actually take Ingram's side, saying, two teams are in a fight. That's not the time for players on other teams to be friends. That's the time to back up your teammate, because that exists. We can't pretend it doesn't exist.
In this case, I can. And the reason that I can is because, again, you're stopping a fight. If you recall, Carmelo Anthony grabbed Brandon Ingram. Nobody said anything about that. But
agreed. Great point.
But we're talking about LeBron grabbing one of his best friends, who happens to be the godfather to his children. He grabbed him. He didn't grab him and hold him so Rondo can hit him. He grabbed him and pulled him away while Melo and others grabbed and pulled Brandon Ingram away. I don't even understand why we're having this discussion. To be quite honest, not this portion of it.
This is not a rhetorical question. It's a genuine question. I'm curious to know your opinion on this. Do you think that this shows, at least in some small way, you mentioned there are a lot of guys around the league who don't want to play with LeBron. Does this show in some small way why some may not? Like he has friends around the league.
No,
the reason why other great players do not want to play with LeBron James, and it's good that at least you're starting to finally understand that, Max Kellerman, it's taken you long enough. But the reason why most of these other good to great players do not want to play with LeBron James is, number one, they understand that everything is going to be about LeBron. Number two, they're going to have to play in the LeBron James system. Number three, they're going to get all the blame should they lose. LeBron's not going to get any of the blame because you guys in the liberal sports media are in love with him. And number four, he's on the other side of his career. You go to play with LeBron James, he's not going to play any defense. LeBron calls it playing free safety. All he does is stand in the paint all day and move his hands around and act like he's directing traffic. People blow by him.
No, not this. Not this incident. No, not at all.
Okay.
Listen, I'm not a fighter, I'm a lover, but if someone spits in your face, it takes a lot of maturity to walk away from that. There's nothing more disrespectful than that.
Don't suspend Chris Paul.
All right, when we come back for...
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see how things go in regards to the camaraderie amongst the LA Lakers as this season transpires. So peace.